So I'm going to get straight into it today. This video is going to be raw, it's going to be to the point, it's going to be uncensored. I haven't really prepared a script or outline to what I'm going to say because I want my emotion to be real, I want it to be authentic. Let's start by having a look at what set me off.
Good evening. A 95-year-old woman who suffers from dementia is fighting for life tonight after being tasered by police inside her nursing home at Cooma. The officers opened fire because they apparently couldn't restrain her any other way.
I am incensed by yet another abuse of power, or if I'm feeling very generous, let's say another display of complete ignorance, a misunderstanding of dementia. Learning that a New South Wales police officer who swears to serve and protect, has tasered 95-year-old Clare Nowland in an aged care facility in Cooma because presumably she refused to put down a steak knife. Now, I don't know the details, I wasn't there, but I do have 30 years of experience in the forensic and or psychiatric field, and I know about de-escalation, I know about dementia. Claire was a frail woman who used a walking frame, and she was tasered by this police officer. Now, dementia facilities are not meant to have items that can be used as weapons, so I can't imagine that it was a very big knife, for starters. And she's 95. She's frail and she's unwell. She has dementia. When are we going to start educating people carrying guns and tasers about dementia, about mental health? What really pisses me off in this video is the Commissioner's response when she says that she hasn't seen the body cam footage and she doesn't intend to.
No. I've heard what's in the body worn and I don't see it necessary that I actually view it.
Are you kidding me? Isn't that the first thing you would want to do? I wasn't there, she wasn't there. The only way to know what really happened is to look at the footage. Why on earth would you, one, not want the public to see it, release the footage? Well, maybe because you're hiding something, maybe not. Show us, we can make up our own minds. But two, as the Commissioner, why wouldn't you want to see it? That way we can identify if training is required, or you can show us if there was a real threat. But for goodness sake, to stand there and say that you're not even going to look at the footage because someone's told you what happens, you have access to the footage. Watch it. Now, this is not an isolated incident, unfortunately. I personally have watched this, personally and professionally watched this time and time again. It keeps on happening. And if we don't start making some noise and demanding some change, then nothing's going to change. 1 in 3 babies born today will develop dementia. And it's time the police either get some training in this area or they are accompanied to such jobs by people who are trained. Heck, I will go. And I guarantee you that I've worked in more risky situations than this one. A grown-ass man with a gun and a taser against a 95-year-old woman with dementia on a walker and maybe a butter knife. I don't know, but heads need to roll. Something needs to happen over this and the many continued and repetitive similar incidents that keep on happening in aged care. And it's not always just police officers either. It's the staff who work in these facilities too. Many have no idea about BPSD, that's behavioural and psychotic symptoms of dementia. In fact, many have no idea that there are even many types of dementia. They continue to mistreat our most vulnerable and most needy members of society, and that's where I'm extremely proactive and emotional. The mistreatment of those who can't care for themselves, whether that's our children or our aged or our severe mental health population. One of my first ever roles in mental health, probably 30 years ago, introduced me to this form of ignorance, and I will never forget it. A lady came to the psychiatric unit that I worked in. She was brought in as an involuntary patient, brought in against her will. and she had clearly been assaulted, covered from head to toe in bruises. And when I spoke to her and asked her what had happened, she told me that she was depressed. She had lost a child and her marriage had fallen apart, and she wanted to take her own life. And she took herself, again in regional New South Wales, to some train tracks, and she stood there. And someone has called the police, and as often is the case, police are the first responders. So they need to be trained in mental health. But these police, and admittedly this was 30 years ago, they tackled her. And she hit her head and she hurt her arm on these metal train tracks. She was handcuffed and she was brought in, kicking and crying and screaming. And she was desperate. Now, they didn't shoot her, and I'm not meaning to be sarcastic. This happens. Police shoot mental health clients. We have seen this many times before. But she was tackled to the ground. She was injured. There was no understanding. There was no wanting to talk to her, engaging with her, asking her what had happened. There was no compassion. She was basically punished for being depressed and for wanting to take her own life. I'll never forget it. But this is not just a professional issue for me. This is highly personal, and that is why I'm so emotive and agitated today. Because those who know me know that I have my mum's story. She went through dementia. She passed in January 2021. But she copped abuse and mistreatment and neglect for years. For what? For having a disease, for having dementia, something beyond her control, something she couldn't help, something that affects the person's identity and their behaviour. My mum's first time in dementia care, a place that I took her to be safe and secure, an incident happened, and it was the first of many. She wanted to go to the shop, and no doubt she was persistent and maybe yelling, because that's what the dementia does to some people. But instead of helping her or listening to her or comforting her, the staff locked her in a room. She removed a fly screen from the first story of this building and she jumped out. But rather than the nursing home acknowledging their fault and their substandard care, they said my mum was a risk. And within 30 minutes of her leaving in an ambulance to go to the hospital, they had shamelessly packed her bags, called me and said they wouldn't take her back because she was a risk. Well, yeah, she was a risk because she has dementia. And that's why I put her in a secured dementia unit, in a facility where she could be cared for and she could be safe. And whilst Mum was in hospital for those injuries, another incident happened. Mum didn't understand what was happening to her. She didn't understand that her brain was literally dissolving, and she would swear, she would be aggressive, and out of fear and confusion, she would react, but she wasn't a threat. She was sick. And whilst in hospital, a visitor, not a patient, but a visitor of a patient, attacked my mum with the pointy metal end of an umbrella repeatedly because that visitor didn't like the way my mum was behaving. And my mum had injuries to her face, to her chest, to her arm, and it was horrible to see. I put in a complaint, nothing happened. I have watched security guards pin my mum down while psychiatrists jabbed her with sedatives and antipsychotics against her will. And as a forensic trained clinical psychologist, I can assure you that most of these people need to be just comforted. They need to be redirected, to have their needs met, to be reassured and to feel safe. That's what they need, to be cared for. Of course there are risks sometimes. Of course there are. I have stories of real risky situations where there is no other option other than to react defensively. But my mum was no threat, and I can't see how 95-year-old Claire was a threat either. My mum has been covered in bruises so many times from being assaulted in residential care. Her arm has been broken, she's had her glasses broken, she was fed food that I wouldn't feed my dog. And most difficult of all is I watched my mum literally being drowned when a worker forced a whole smoothie down her throat so fast, in less than 15 seconds, when my mum could hardly swallow or could hardly breathe. This act caused my mum to aspirate, and within 48 hours later, my mum was dead. We had the Royal Commission into the quality of aged care services here in Australia in 2018 because there were so many complaints of abuse towards our aged population in care. And I contributed to this inquiry, telling them of my mum's experiences of abuse and neglect. And I could literally make a 6-hour video here today telling you of all the stories that not only has my mum gone through, but I have witnessed in my professional life in these areas. It is truly unimaginable. The Royal Commission found that the aged care sector fails to meet the needs of its older vulnerable citizens and that it doesn't deliver uniformly safe and quality care, that it's unkind and it's uncaring towards older people, and in too many instances that it simply neglects them. Well, we didn't need a commission to tell us that, did we? But process, I get it. But it's 2023. Things are still the same. It's still happening and it's still unacceptable. Honestly, it makes me so mad. We need to demand change. We need to do something. This can't continue. But it starts somewhere. Maybe the Minister of Aged Care, the Ministry of Health, the Commissioner of Police, the nursing unit manager who I made this complaint to when my mum was attacked in his care and he did nothing. The worker at the facility that literally drowned my mum. She didn't understand. She wasn't trained. The security guards that held my mother down. The doctors that forced medication into her body against her will. The police officer that tasered Clare. It's enough. And let's have no tolerance for this ignorance and this ongoing abuse of our elders. Let's demand action and justice for Clare. And let's not forget this story in a day or two. Let's hold everyone involved to account now. And let's pray that Clare recovers soon. It's not okay. In fact, it's barbaric and it's evil to let this continue. And in the words of, I think, Edmund Burke, evil triumphs when good people do nothing. So let's do something. Sending love and prayers to you, Clare, to your family, to your 8 children, your 24 grandchildren, and 31, soon to be 35 great-grandchildren, and to the millions of people like my mum who have sadly experienced abuse or neglect in this awful system. Perhaps out of this mountain of despair, we can find a stone of hope. Till then, take care of yourselves and each other, and let's make some change.